For a long time, people have been asking the same questions over and over again, and lately those questions have only gotten louder. 3 family members are still missing from the home. The silence around their whereabouts has grown heavier. And at the same time, new activity has started popping up online that has left a lot of supporters confused, frustrated, and suspicious. Because while 3 people remain gone, something else is happening back at the property. The house is being cleaned. Photos have started circulating. Floors swept. Trash cleared. Furniture rearranged. It looks better than it has in years. And on the surface, that might sound like a good thing. People wanted the home cleaned for a long time. People donated money for improvements. People hoped conditions would improve. But the timing of it all is what makes people uneasy. 3 family members are still not home. No clear updates. No verified visits. No timeline for reunification. No official explanation that satisfies the people who have followed this situation from the beginning. Just silence where answers should be. And then, almost at the same time the cleaned-up house photos appear, something else starts circulating. Cash App requests. BJ is asking for money again. This is where a lot of people stopped and said, wait a minute, because the messaging doesn't line up. On one hand, the house looks better than ever. On the other hand, there's a renewed push asking the public to send money, supposedly for legal help, transportation, or bringing the family back together. But there's no transparency, no receipts, no confirmed lawyer, no documented plan. Just emotional appeals and payment handles. And for many people, that's a problem. Supporters have been burned before. Money has been sent in the past with promises attached to it, only for those promises to quietly disappear. So now, when people see another round of requests, the reaction isn't sympathy first. It's skepticism. Especially because the people being asked to donate are the same ones who have been emotionally invested for years. The same people who cried watching earlier videos. The same people who defended the family online. The same people who sent money believing it would help stabilize things. And now they're being asked again, while 3 people are still missing. That disconnect is impossible to ignore. What's made this even more uncomfortable is the way the narrative keeps shifting. One day the focus is on cleaning the house. The next day, it's about raising money. Another day, it's about emotional pain and sleepless nights. Then it circles back to finances. But nowhere in between is there a clear, consistent update about the 3 missing family members. That silence speaks louder than any Cash App post ever could. People are asking basic questions. Are they safe? Are they together? Are there visits happening? Is there a plan for reunification? And instead of answers, they're getting donation links. That's why so many longtime supporters are pulling back. Not because they don't care, but because caring without clarity turns into exploitation. And people are tired of feeling like their empathy is being used as leverage. Another issue that keeps coming up is control. Who is actually in charge right now? Who decides what gets posted, what gets cleaned, and what gets asked for? Because when you look at the situation as a whole, it doesn't feel coordinated in a healthy way. It feels reactive, like different people are pushing different agendas at different times, all under the same emotional umbrella of helping the family. But helping doesn't look like confusion. Helping doesn't look like mixed signals. Helping doesn't look like asking for money while avoiding accountability. And a house being cleaned only adds another layer. People wanted improvements, yes, but many are now asking whether the cleanup is being used as optics. Something to show online. Something to say, look, progress is happening, without addressing the deeper issue. Because a clean house doesn't mean a reunited family. And for a lot of supporters, that was always the priority. There's also a growing concern about donor fatigue. People have limits, emotional, financial, and mental. And when updates feel incomplete or selective, trust erodes fast. Once trust is gone, It's almost impossible to rebuild. What's especially troubling is how familiar this pattern feels to those who have followed similar situations online. The cycle of crisis, donations, silence, and then another crisis, each time asking for more without fully accounting for what came before. That's why more people are speaking up now. Not to attack, not to harass, but to say, we need transparency. If money is being requested, there should be clarity. If the house is being cleaned, there should be context. If 3 people are missing, that should be the main focus every single time. Instead, the story feels fractured, and fractured stories don't inspire confidence. At the center of all of this are real people, vulnerable people, people whose lives have been dissected online for years. That alone should make everyone involved extra cautious, extra responsible, and extra transparent. Because when the public is involved, especially financially, there's an obligation to be honest, even when the truth isn't convenient. Right now, too many things don't add up. 3 missing family members, a suddenly clean house, renewed Cash App requests, and no solid answers tying it all together. That's why people are uneasy. That's why people are questioning. And that's why this update matters. Because this isn't just about money. It's about trust. It's about accountability. And it's about whether the focus is really where it should be. Before anyone sends another dollar. Before anyone shares another payment link. Before anyone posts another update. The most important question still hasn't been answered. Where are the 3 missing family members? And when are they coming home? Comment below and share what you think about this update. As the days pass, the situation only grows more complicated, not clearer. People expected that after the initial shock, after the dust settled, there would be straightforward answers. Instead, what followed was a slow drip of partial information, emotional posts, and conflicting signals that left supporters trying to piece together the truth on their own. One of the biggest issues people keep coming back to is priority. When 3 family members are still not home, everything else should be secondary. That's how most supporters see it. Cleaning, organizing, posting updates, even asking for help should all center on one question. What is being done to bring them back? But that's not what's happening. Instead, attention seems to shift depending on the day. One moment, it's about how hard things feel emotionally. The next, it's about money. Then it's about showing progress at the property. And then it circles back to emotional pain again. Each piece on its own might make sense, but together they feel scattered, like there's no clear direction or plan holding everything together. That lack of structure makes people uneasy. It's not that supporters don't believe grief exists. It's not that they don't understand stress, exhaustion, or fear. Most people watching from have experienced those things themselves. What troubles them is the absence of concrete steps. When someone says they need money for legal help, the next logical question is, what lawyer? When someone says they're working toward reunification, the next question is, how? Those questions are rarely answered. Instead, people are told to trust the process, to be patient, to believe that things are happening behind the scenes. But patience only works when trust is intact. And trust erodes when transparency disappears. Another concern that keeps surfacing is who benefits from the current situation. That's a hard question, but it's one people are asking more openly now. With 3 family members gone, online attention hasn't stopped. In some ways, it has intensified. Posts get more engagement. Videos get more comments. Emotions run higher. And with that attention comes influence and sometimes money. That doesn't automatically mean bad intentions, but it does create an environment where accountability becomes essential. People want to know whether the money being requested is actually moving things forward or whether it's simply keeping things afloat without solving anything. They want to know if there's coordination with professionals or if everything is being handled informally and emotionally. because emotional decision-making, especially in situations involving vulnerable adults, often leads to more harm, not less. And that's what many supporters fear most, that despite good intentions, the chaos itself is making things worse. The cleaned house adds another layer to this fear. Some people see it as hope. Others see it as distraction, because while the house looks better, the core issue remains untouched. A clean space does not guarantee safety. It does not guarantee reunification, and it does not replace the need for legal clarity and oversight. Several supporters have pointed out something else that's hard to ignore. The house was cleaned after the 3 family members were removed, not before. That timing matters. It raises uncomfortable questions about why these changes weren't possible earlier, when it might have prevented outside intervention in the first place. That doesn't mean blame should be piled on anyone, but it does mean lessons should be learned, and those lessons should inform what happens next. Another thing that keeps resurfacing is the emotional pressure placed on the audience. Posts that describe sleepless nights, loneliness, and heartbreak are powerful. They pull at the heart. But when those posts are followed immediately by payment requests, people feel manipulated, even if that wasn't the intention. There's a difference between sharing pain and using pain as persuasion, and that line feels increasingly blurred. Supporters are also noticing that updates often come from third parties rather than official sources. Friends, acquaintances, and online figures step in to speak on behalf of the situation, sometimes contradicting each other. That creates confusion, and confusion is the enemy of trust. If there's a legal process happening, people want to hear about it directly, clearly, and consistently. If there isn't one, people want honesty about that too. What they don't want is vague reassurance paired with urgent requests for money. The absence of clear leadership is another concern. Who is actually coordinating efforts? Who is communicating with authorities? Who is responsible for ensuring that decisions are made in the best interest of those who are missing? Without answers, supporters are left guessing, and guessing leads to rumors, speculation, and division. Some people are still willing to donate, believing any help is better than none. Others have drawn firm boundaries, saying they won't give another dollar without proof and structure. Neither position comes from cruelty. Both come from experience, because many of these supporters have been here before. They've seen online situations where money poured in and nothing changed. They've watched vulnerable people become symbols instead of individuals, and they don't want to see that happen again. At the center of all of this are 3 people who cannot speak for themselves publicly. That fact alone should slow everything down. It should force careful thought, professional involvement, and ethical restraint. Instead, the pace feels rushed when it comes to fundraising and slow when it comes to answers. That imbalance is what people are reacting to. There's also a growing feeling that the story is being shaped more for social media than for resolution. Clean spaces, emotional quotes, and donation links are easy to post. Legal progress, paperwork, and quiet negotiations are not. But real change rarely looks dramatic. It often looks boring, methodical, and slow. Supporters want to know if that boring work is happening. And if it is, why not say so? Even small confirmations would go a long way. A statement that a lawyer has been contacted. A clarification about visitation status. A general outline of next steps. None of that violates privacy, and all of it builds trust. Instead, the silence continues. As more time passes, the fear grows that this situation is becoming normalized, that people are adjusting to the idea that the 3 missing family members might not return anytime soon. That's a frightening thought for those who believe family unity should be the goal. No one expects miracles, but people do expect honesty. And right now, honesty feels incomplete. This update isn't about taking sides. It's about acknowledging what supporters are seeing and feeling. Confusion, concern, fatigue, and a deep desire for the focus to shift back where it belongs. Because no amount of cleaning, posting, or fundraising matters more than 3 people still not home. That's the truth many people are sitting with. And until that truth is addressed directly, every new Cash App request will be met with more questions than compassion. Comment below and share what you think about where this situation is heading. As time stretches on, a new pattern becomes harder to ignore. Not just what's being said, but what's being avoided. Silence, in situations like this, speaks louder than any update ever could. And the longer that silence continues around key questions, the more people begin to fill in the gaps themselves. One of the biggest unanswered questions is coordination. Who is actually steering this effort? Not emotionally supporting it, not posting about it, not reacting to it, but managing it. Because a situation involving adult protective services, missing family members, and potential reunification cannot be handled casually. It requires structure, documentation, timelines, and accountability. If from the outside, it looks improvised. Updates come sporadically. Information changes depending on who's speaking. One person says progress is being made, another says nothing has changed. One post suggests legal steps are underway, the next implies money is still needed to even begin. That inconsistency fuels doubt, not because people want to be skeptical, but because they've learned to be. Supporters are no longer just asking what happened. They're asking what's the plan? And that question still doesn't have a clear answer. Another issue people are grappling with is motive versus outcome. Even if intentions are good, outcomes matter more. If actions, intentional or not, are delaying reunification, complicating legal processes, or creating confusion, then those actions need to be questioned. Accountability doesn't mean accusation. It means responsibility. Right now, responsibility feels diffuse. When everyone is involved, no one is fully accountable. Friends step in. Online supporters intervene. Third parties speak on behalf of others. But no single voice stands out as the one making decisions grounded in legal guidance and professional oversight. That's dangerous territory, especially when emotions are high. There's also a growing concern about narrative control. Who decides what version of events gets amplified, which details are highlighted, and which are quietly ignored? People notice that certain topics, like money needs and emotional hardship, are repeated often, while others, like legal benchmarks or timelines, are barely mentioned. That imbalance feels intentional to some, even if it isn't. And once that perception takes hold, it's hard to undo. Another uncomfortable reality is that online attention changes dynamics. When a situation becomes content, priorities can shift without anyone realizing it. Engagement becomes validation. Sympathy becomes currency. And urgency becomes performative. That doesn't mean anyone is exploiting the situation on purpose. But it does mean there's incentive to keep the story alive, even if resolution would mean the attention fades. That's something many supporters are quietly wrestling with, because they don't want to believe that the absence of 3 family members has become normalized, or worse, useful. But when weeks turn into months and the focus drifts from reunification to fundraising, it's a question that naturally arises. Another layer adding to the concern is the involvement of multiple outside helpers. While help can be a blessing, too many hands without coordination can create chaos. Different people offering advice, money, housing ideas, or legal opinions, often without full context, can unintentionally derail progress. Professionals exist for a reason. Lawyers, caseworkers, advocates. These roles are not interchangeable with well-meaning friends or online supporters. When those lines blur, mistakes happen. And in cases involving vulnerable adults, mistakes can have lasting consequences. Supporters want reassurance that professional guidance is not just planned, but already in place. Without that reassurance, every decision feels risky. There's also the issue of credibility. When someone asks for money, credibility becomes the foundation of trust. That credibility isn't built through emotion alone. It's built through transparency, consistency, and follow-through. Right now, many feel that credibility is fragile, not destroyed, but strained. And once credibility weakens, even sincere efforts can be questioned. Some supporters have begun stepping back, not because they don't care, but because they feel emotionally exhausted. They've invested time, concern, and sometimes money, only to feel like they're no closer to understanding what's actually happening. That kind of fatigue leads to disengagement. Others remain deeply invested, but increasingly vocal. They're asking harder questions, pressing for clarity, and refusing to accept vague assurances. They're not trying to create conflict. They're trying to protect the people at the center of this situation. Those voices deserve to be heard, not dismissed. Because skepticism is not cruelty. It's caution. Another point being raised is sustainability. Even if donations continue, even if short-term needs are met, what happens long-term? Is there a realistic plan for stability, for oversight, for preventing this from happening again? A cleaned house and occasional updates are not a long-term solution. And without long-term thinking, any progress made could be temporary. The most troubling possibility some supporters fear is that the longer this drags on, the harder reunification becomes. Time works against families and systems like this. Routines change. Placements become normalized. Bureaucracy hardens. Every delay matters. That's why people are frustrated, not just confused. They want urgency where it counts. They want transparency where it's owed. They want compassion paired with competence. Above all, they want the focus returned to the three people still missing from the home. Not as symbols, not as talking points, but as individuals whose lives have been disrupted. Until that happens, every update will be met with mixed reactions. Hope tangled with doubt. Sympathy mixed with suspicion. This isn't about choosing sides. It's about asking whether the current path is truly leading toward resolution. We're just circling the same questions over and over again. Because time keeps moving, and people are still waiting. Comment below and share your thoughts on where things stand now and what needs to change moving forward. As the situation continues to unfold, something else becomes increasingly clear. Trust is no longer assumed. It has to be earned repeatedly. And once trust becomes conditional, every action is scrutinized more closely than before. That's where things feel especially fragile right now. For many observers, the biggest issue isn't any single action. It's the accumulation of small, unresolved concerns layered on top of one another. Each unanswered question stacks onto the last, creating a weight that's hard to shake. Even neutral updates begin to feel loaded when clarity is missing. One of the most common concerns people raise is this. If progress is truly being made, why does it feel so invisible? Legal processes are slow, yes. Systems are complicated, absolutely. But usually, even in slow processes, there are markers, filed paperwork, scheduled hearings, official representation, defined next steps. Supporters aren't seeing those markers, and that absence creates anxiety. Instead, what they see are fragments. A post here, a comment there, a photo without context, a request without a breakdown. None of these things are inherently wrong, but together they form a picture that feels incomplete. And when people are emotionally invested, incompleteness can feel like avoidance. Another point quietly troubling many supporters is the shift in focus. Early on, attention centered on concern, safety, and reunification. Over time, The focus appears to have drifted toward logistics that don't clearly connect back to the core issue. People ask themselves, how does this help bring the missing family members home? If the answer isn't obvious, frustration grows. There's also discomfort around who speaks on behalf of whom. When multiple voices claim to represent the same situation, contradictions are almost inevitable. One person's reassurance conflicts with another's urgency. One emphasizes patience, another pushes for immediate action. That fragmentation weakens confidence. Supporters want to know who has the authority to speak accurately, who is relaying verified information versus personal belief or hope. Without that distinction, even well-intentioned updates can mislead. Another layer adding tension is the emotional appeal being used. Emotional truth matters, but when emotion becomes the primary driver of requests or messaging, it can overshadow practical necessity. People begin to feel manipulated, even if manipulation isn't intended. That's a dangerous line. Once supporters feel emotionally pressured rather than informed, many disengage entirely. Others push back harder. Neither outcome helps the people at the center of the situation. There's also growing awareness that public involvement can sometimes complicate private resolutions. Systems don't always respond well to online pressure, especially when narratives become polarized. While public attention can protect, it can also slow processes if officials feel scrutinized or misrepresented. That balance is delicate and currently feels off. Some supporters have begun to question whether stepping back might actually help more than constant commentary. Others argue that silence would allow the situation to be forgotten. This tension between visibility and restraint has no easy answer, but it does highlight how unclear leadership has left supporters unsure of their role. Another concern emerging is dependency. When financial support becomes recurring without measurable progress, it raises alarms. Not because people don't want to help, but because they fear enabling a cycle rather than resolving a crisis. Transparency breaks that cycle. Vagueness sustains it. People want to know what success looks like. Not in abstract terms, but concretely. What would resolution mean? What milestones indicate movement in the right direction? What happens if those milestones aren't met? Without answers, hope becomes fragile. There's also the human cost of prolonged uncertainty. Everyone involved, supporters included, experiences emotional fatigue. But for those directly affected, the toll is deeper. Prolonged separation, instability, and lack of clarity can create lasting harm that no amount of later support can fully undo. That's why time matters so much. And that's why patience, while necessary, cannot replace action. As conversations continue online, the tone has shifted. Early outrage has softened into cautious concern. Blind support has evolved into conditional trust. And unconditional belief has been replaced with a need for evidence. This shift isn't cruelty. It's growth. People are learning that good intentions are not enough. That complex situations require more than passion. They require structure, humility, and willingness to answer hard questions. Right now, those hard questions are still hanging in the air. Who is accountable? What is the concrete plan? Where's professional oversight? How does each action directly serve reunification? Until those questions are addressed clearly and consistently, uncertainty will continue to dominate the narrative. And the longer uncertainty persists, the harder it becomes to rebuild trust. What should happen next is not louder messaging, but clearer messaging. Not more emotion, but more information. Not more urgency online, but measurable steps offline. That's what supporters are asking for. Not perfection, not miracles, just clarity. Comment below with your thoughts on whether transparency has improved or declined, and what you believe needs to happen next. By now, The story has reached a point where silence says as much as statements ever did. What's missing isn't noise, it's resolution. And the absence of resolution has created a vacuum where speculation, doubt, and frustration continue to grow. At the heart of it all is a simple truth that keeps getting buried under layers of explanation. 3 people are still not home. Everything else, cleanup photos, side narratives, online arguments, financial requests, exists in the shadow of that fact. That's why so many supporters feel stuck. They aren't asking for drama. They aren't demanding perfection. They are asking for alignment. They want actions, words, and priorities to point in the same direction. Right now, they don't. When people see a house being cleaned while loved ones remain absent, it triggers confusion. Cleaning can be a positive step. It can signal preparation, responsibility, or hope. But without context, it feels disconnected. People ask themselves whether energy is being spent on the right things at the right time. Context is everything. The same applies to financial requests. Asking for help isn't inherently wrong. Many families rely on community support during crises. But trust depends on clarity, what the money is for, how it will be used, and what outcomes it supports. Without that clarity, even sincere requests can feel uncomfortable. Supporters begin to hesitate, not because they don't care, but because they care enough to ask questions. Another shift happening quietly is the recentering of accountability. Early on, blame was scattered everywhere. Now, people are narrowing their focus. They are asking who actually has the power to move things forward and who doesn't. That distinction matters. There's growing recognition that not every voice online represents authority, access, or accurate information. Some voices amplify emotion. Others amplify confusion. Very few seem to amplify concrete progress. And progress is what everyone wants. One of the most painful realizations for supporters is understanding that good intentions can still lead to harm if they aren't paired with responsibility. Saying, "I miss them," or "I'm trying," isn't the same as demonstrating a plan that works. Grief and effort are not interchangeable. Another layer to this is the emotional toll on those left behind. Living in a constant state of waiting for calls, updates, permissions, approvals, can erode stability. It creates a sense of powerlessness that no amount of online validation can fix. That's why people are beginning to say less and observe more. They're watching patterns instead of promises. They're noticing what changes and what stays the same. They're paying attention to timelines. And timelines matter. When weeks turn into months without clear milestones, trust weakens. Not all delays are suspicious, but prolonged ambiguity always raises questions, especially when public attention remains high. Supporters are also grappling with a difficult truth. Sometimes public involvement helps, and sometimes it doesn't. There's a growing sense that constant online engagement may be sustaining a loop instead of breaking it. That realization doesn't come easily. People want to believe that staying loud equals staying helpful. But many are now wondering whether restraint, coordination, and professional intervention would serve better than continuous exposure. This doesn't mean people are giving up. It means they're recalibrating. They want to know who is actually advocating behind the scenes, who is filing paperwork, who is communicating with officials, who is qualified to navigate the systems involved. And if those answers aren't available, they want honesty about that too. Honesty builds more trust than optimism without evidence. Another important shift is the recognition that reunification isn't just an emotional goal. It's a legal and logistical one. Love alone doesn't reopen doors. Proper channels do. That's where the focus needs to return. Not to side conflicts, not to online debates, not to appearances, but to the unglamorous, difficult work of resolution. People are ready to support that work. They just need to see it. Right now, Supporters feel like they're being asked to believe without being shown. And belief without proof is fragile, especially when history has taught them to be cautious. The path forward doesn't require everyone to agree. It requires consistency, clear communication, defined goals, and accountability for outcomes. Those things don't silence critics, they dissolve them. As this chapter closes, one thing is certain. Attention is no longer unconditional. Sympathy is no longer automatic. Support is becoming intentional. That's not cruelty, that's discernment. And discernment may be the most important thing left in this story. Comment below and share your thoughts. Do you feel clarity is finally coming, or is the situation still stuck in the same cycle? Thank you for watching this video. Click here to watch another video that might interest you.